Hey guys, Mr. Fox here. I'm going to take a quick walkthrough on my Clevo P870DM3. We're going to look at the BIOS settings and how I have that set up, just to walk through on the menus. So, alright, this is a PremaMod BIOS. So it's an enthusiast BIOS. It's not your stock Clevo BIOS. It's got a lot of differences. So we're going to highlight those menu by menu. So on the main menu here, we've got mostly just information about the system, date and time, that type of thing. Information on the SATA ports, that type of thing. So nothing out of the ordinary there. Also tells us the BIOS version and the ME version that it's running, as well as the keyboard and mainboard EC and the VBIOS information. The Advanced tab, starting from the top, we have Advanced Chipset Control. And here's you can turn things on and off, like your Bluetooth, wireless LAN, switch your FN key with your Windows key position, GPU performance scaling, which is NVIDIA's $5 word for overclocking, flexi charger, and DDI control. You can see how I have those set there. On the first overclocking menu, here's where we have our access to platform power limits 1 and 2, the platform limit 1 time window. We can set the voltage regulator current limit in amps, and our core ratios and cache ratio. If you'll notice here that I have my core ratio set for 50, I'm running 5 gigahertz. I have the voltage regulator current limit maxed out, 8191. We'll find that in another menu as well. You notice I have the cache ratio set to 83. What that's doing is putting the cache ratio in an automatic mode rather than me overriding it. And it's always going to be 3 bins or 300 megahertz less than what our core ratio is set at. So if I have this set on 83, the cache ratio is effectively going to be running 4.7 gigahertz because that's 300 megahertz less than 5 gigahertz. Hope that makes sense. We also have a memory menu here, which I do not use. I do not recommend making changes on this menu. You can if you want to, but we'll make it elsewhere where we have more options available to us. You can see I have my SATA mode set here to AHCI. You can also change that on the chipset menu here. We'll get there in a moment. So take a look at the layout of things here. We've got Intel's ACPI settings, CPU features configuration, CPU power and voltage regulator and performance, power management IC, overclocking again with more settings in there, our base clock, our Thunderbolt settings, ACPI settings, smart settings, acoustic management, that's for mechanical hard drives, network stack, compatibility service module or CSM configuration, USB, and info report configuration, which is the information that displays on your screen as it's booting up. So the next available menu to us is Intel RC ACPI settings. So I have everything basically disabled on this screen. I have the PECI access method set to the default. Everything on the screen is at defaults now except for PTID support, which I have disabled. CPU configurations. I was set wrong. I have software guard extensions disabled. The things that are not standard here, that's wrong too. I reset the BIOS and forgot to change this. So you can see these are the settings that are my defaults. That's on the CPU features configuration. CPU power, voltage regulator, and performance menu. Here we have a number of different things available to us. You can see the defaults that I use. System defaults are to have race to halt enabled and HDC control enabled, and I have both of those disabled. I also have the efficiency for P-state and turbo set to disabled. So the platform voltage regulator settings, we got the P6 max power, which is set the same, maxed out as what we saw on the other screen, 8191. System agent voltage regulator domain. The settings that are not default I have are my I'm on offset, current limit, and voltage limit for the voltage regulator. And I have basically the same settings, identical, on the core IA voltage regulator domain. I've set my platform power limit 4 and 3 at 160,000. Basically set that whatever you want to. You can set it for way more than the CPU is going to ever use, and it won't matter because it's a limit and the CPU will only use what it needs. I prefer running with C-states disabled. I have my thermal monitor disabled. Power limit 3, I've got that set the same at 160,000, and I have the CFG lock disabled. Power management IC, this is important for memory overclocking. I have these values maxed out as high as they'll go. I'm running my memory at 3200 megahertz right now at CL15. So you can see both of those are maxed out. Okay, the second overclocking menu. Here's where overclocking is enabled or disabled. I also am not using defaults on this screen. I have watchdog timer disabled, XTU disabled, RSR disabled, and base clock aware adaptive voltage disabled. Those items are the opposite of their defaults, which are normally enabled. And the reason I have XTU interface disabled is because I use throttle stop, and when I have that enabled, I have random issues with throttle stop causing Windows to freeze or a blue screen. I'm not sure why. I think maybe it gives it locks access to registers or MSRs, mailboxes or something. So for whatever reason, if I were using XTU, I would need to have that enabled, because if it's set to disabled, you cannot use XTU to change, for example, your memory settings. It just won't work. It won't even show up in the XTU interface if that's disabled. The processor, here's where we set our voltage. You notice I have the max overclock ratio set to 83, which is the maximum, and I also have the cache ratio set at 83, which is the maximum. And if you recall in that previous overclocking menu, I showed you where I had cache set to 83 as well. Basically, that's putting it into automatic mode where it always automatically is 300 megahertz less than the core overclock ratio or the turbo ratio. So for 5 gigahertz, I'm using static voltage, which I use for everything, static voltage or override. I find it more stable than adaptive voltage. And I'm using 1.26 volts for the CPU to run 5 gigahertz. I have my minimum ring overclock ratio set to. Memory, I have XMP 3200 G-Skill Ripjaws memory in here now, but I still choose to run a custom profile. XMP1 is 3000 megahertz, XMP2 is 3200, and honestly using the stock SPD values from the XMP from G.Skill is not stable on this system, so I've changed some things. Now, I'm using the same timings for most things for 3200 that I use for 3000. The differences you're going to have is for 3000, this reference clock is 100 megahertz and the ratio is 15. So for 3200 we switched to 133 megahertz on the reference clock and 12 for the ratio. Now if I wanted to bump this 3200 up to 3333, if I change this odd Q clock ratio from disabled to enabled, what it does is it takes your actual memory speed, which in the case of 3200 megahertz, and it adds whatever you have for your reference clock, in this case 133, it adds that many megahertz to it. So 3200 plus 133 is 3333. If I were running 3200 with 100 for the reference clock and 15 for the ratio, and I enabled odd Q clock ratio, our memory would be running 31 megahertz. So a couple of important things on this screen for stability with RAM is your TREFI. You may need to increase that. I have it set up to 12960, as you can see here. TRFC, increasing that helps with stability. And then TWTR, the Clevo BIOS default is 0. I've got it set to 7 because it reduces errors with the memory and fewer blue screens and that type of thing. And I've got my voltage bumped up from 1.2 to 1.4. So Encore, I have that set at 200 millivolts. That also helps with the memory overclocking. Base clock, here's with the PremaMagic. I have ICC profile 0 set, which means spread spectrum is turned off. What that means is you're not going to see a lot of clocking up and down of your CPU cores, like if you're looking in GPU-Z or hardware info. CPU clock speed is constantly changing up and down, often below an even number. If you have it set for 5 gigahertz, it may be showing that it's running 4.975 gigahertz or something retarded like that. If you have spread spectrum turned off, it's going to stay locked at whatever you have it set for. I have it bumped up by like 6/100ths of a megahertz so that it always reads at least equal to or greater than whatever my core ratio is, never less than. Here's our Thunderbolt settings. A lot of stuff in there. You can enable the eGPU through the Thunderbolt ports. You can enable bootable USB through the Thunderbolt port or USB Type-C 3.1 port. ACPI. That was set wrong too. I have everything disabled that has to do with power management. I don't have any use for power management. Don't care about it, so I disable everything. I have my smart settings disabled. I don't want any smart settings checked at post. Acoustic management does not apply since we have only SSDs in this machine. I have network stack disabled. I have no need to boot from that. Now I am running CSM. I have it set to UEFI and legacy, and that is related to what we have over here on the boot menu under OS select. You can see what I have set here. I'm dual booting Windows 10 and Windows 7, each on its own SSD. So I have Windows 8 Plus set that enables USB 3.0 support at post. I've disabled UEFI here and set it to launch CSM. And then we go back over here to the CSM menu. I have it set for both UEFI and legacy for the filter option. And I have the storage or the drive set to boot with UEFI, but the video to legacy mode because Windows 7 does not play nice with legacy mode. USB configuration. I normally have this port 6060 formulation enabled. That helps if I plug in an old USB keyboard that's not OS aware. And the info report configuration controls what shows on your screen at boot time and how long it stays there. It's set for 1 second right now. Chipset menu, we have memory information and configuration. You can disable one or both of your DIMM slots on each channel. It has a memory controller set to fast boot enabled, and it shows here that we're running 3200 megahertz, and each slot is populated. DMI configuration, we're just running the defaults here, nothing special. Same with the DGPU option, nothing special here. Running all BIOS defaults on the DGPU configuration menu. I normally have VDT disabled, and this is probably not set right since everything else was set wrong. I don't change anything on the PCI Express configuration menu. On the SATA and RST menu, here again we can set AHCI here. I disable LPM support. All it does is lets the drives go into lower power sleep mode. I don't have any need for that, so I don't want it. If you have any NVMe drives, they will not be showing in here. Only SATA and M.2 drives will. So I have 2 NVMe drives and 2 1 terabyte Samsung SSDs. So here this needs to be changed to solid state drive and iSATA, since they are plugged into SATA ports and not M.2. Still works fine with that set wrong, but prefer to have it set the correct way. I don't change anything on the advanced USB or HD audio configuration. Just leave all BIOS defaults there. Here's an option that Prema added also, HPAT, where you can enable and disable HPAT, or the high precision event timer, and I have it enabled. Security, since we're running in CSM, we don't have secure boot. This is where you would turn off secure boot, and you could also disable your trusted platform module, which I prefer to do. But since we are not booting UEFI mode, those are not available here. And then our boot screen, our boot menu. I like my numlock to be on. There's no reason for it to ever be turned off because I have a 10 key. As nice as Prema's logo looks to me, I'd prefer not to have a boot logo. If you're running in UEFI mode, you cannot disable the boot logo for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. But since I'm not booting in UEFI mode, I can turn the boot logo on and off, which is nice. And we have our boot priorities here and our OS select there. And that's it. We are all done and ready to reboot. Thanks for watching my video and have a great day.